The fluorescent lights in the hematology waiting room had been humming the same monotonous note for 3 hours. Jasmine Carter sat with her son Elijah pressed against her side, his small body radiating the kind of heat that came from pain crisis rather than fever. 7 years old, 73 pounds, eyes that had seen more hospital ceilings than playgrounds. Her phone buzzed for the 4th time in an hour. Marcus, her ex-husband. She let it go to voicemail. She already knew what he'd say. The same thing he'd been saying since Elijah's diagnosis 18 months ago. Too expensive, too complicated, too much for one person to handle. You need to consider placement. Residential care. Let professionals deal with it. As if their son was a problem to be outsourced. The appointment scheduler appeared in the doorway, clipboard pressed against her chest like armor. Ms. Carter, I'm very sorry, but without payment confirmation, we can't proceed with today's infusion. Jasmine stood slowly, keeping one hand on Elijah's shoulder. I submitted the insurance authorization 3 days ago. The woman's expression held the particular kind of pity that people develop when they deliver bad news often enough to become numb to it. Your coverage was terminated on the 15th. The scheduler's voice dropped lower. I'm truly sorry. If you can arrange payment, we can reschedule for next week. Next week. Elijah's crisis episodes had been increasing in frequency. 3 in the past month. Each one stripping away a little more of the bright, curious boy he'd been before sickle cell disease rewrote the rules of his body. How much? $8,400. Jasmine's bank account held $937. The math was simple, brutal, and completely unambiguous. She took Elijah's hand, felt the tremor in his fingers that meant pain was building beneath his medication. They walked past the other families in the waiting room. Parents who had insurance that worked, jobs that provided coverage, marriages that had survived the strain of chronic illness. In the parking lot, Elijah looked up at her with eyes too old for his face. Are we going home now? Jasmine knelt in front of him despite the protest from her own knees, overworked from double shifts at the diner. Yeah, baby. We're going home. Home was a 1-bedroom apartment in the section of Baltimore where landlords asked fewer questions and accepted cash deposits. The building smelled like old cooking oil and defeat. Jasmine carried Elijah up 3 flights because the elevator had been broken for 6 weeks, his weight feeling both substantial and terrifyingly fragile against her chest. Inside, she settled him on the couch with blankets, turned on cartoons he was too tired to really watch, and stood at the kitchen window, staring at nothing while her hands shook. Her phone rang again. Not Marcus this time. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something made her answer. Ms. Jasmine Carter? The voice was female, professional, carefully neutral. Yes, my name is Patricia Holloway. I'm an estate attorney in Philadelphia. I'm calling about your great-aunt, Dr. Vivian Marshall. Jasmine's mind raced backward through family connections she'd barely thought about in years. Vivian Marshall, her grandmother's sister, a woman she'd met exactly twice at family reunions decades ago. A research scientist who'd never married, never had children, lived alone in Philadelphia, doing work nobody in the family quite understood. I'm sorry to inform you that Dr. Marshall passed away 6 weeks ago. The lawyer paused, the kind of deliberate silence that preceded complicated information. You're named as the sole beneficiary in her will. The words landed without impact at first. Jasmine was too exhausted for surprises to feel like anything except additional complications. I don't understand. Dr. Marshall left specific instructions. The estate consists primarily of a commercial property, a former medical laboratory she purchased in 1997. The building has been vacant for approximately 3 years, but it's fully paid for, and the deed transfers to you immediately. Jasmine pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window. A vacant building in Philadelphia. Not money, not medical coverage, not anything that could help Elijah right now. What am I supposed to do with a laboratory? That's entirely your decision, Ms. Carter. I can arrange a walkthrough if you'd like to see the property before deciding whether to accept or decline the bequest. There are some documents that require your signature regardless. Jasmine thought about $8,400. about insurance companies that terminated coverage for children with expensive diseases, about ex-husbands who suggested placement like you were discussing a pet you could no longer afford. When can I see it? The laboratory stood in a neighborhood that Philadelphia had forgotten sometime around 1975 and never quite remembered. 3 stories of brick and narrow windows, wedged between an automotive repair shop and a building that might have been a church once, but was now just architecture waiting for demolition. Patricia Holloway met Jasmine and Elijah outside, a trim woman in her 50s with silver hair and glasses that probably cost more than Jasmine's monthly rent. She held a leather folder and a ring of keys that looked older than both of them. Dr. Marshall purchased this building outright in 1997 for $800. The attorney's tone suggested this information should mean something. It was an estate sale. The previous owner's family wanted it gone quickly. $800 for a 3-story building? The neighborhood was worse then. Much worse. Holloway unlocked the front door, which opened with a particular sound of hinges that hadn't moved in years. The property has appreciated considerably since then, despite the area's decline. Current assessed value is approximately $1.7 million. Jasmine stepped inside, pulling Elijah close. The air smelled like dust and chemicals and abandonment. The front room had been a reception area once. A desk remained, pushed against one wall. Filing cabinets lined another. Everything covered in the kind of grime that accumulates when time moves forward and no one bothers to clean. The first floor contained what had clearly been examination rooms. Small spaces with remnants of medical equipment. Cabinets with faded labels. A sink stained with rust. Elijah wandered slowly, touching walls with the gentle curiosity of a child who'd spent enough time in medical facilities to feel oddly comfortable in them. What did she do here? Research, primarily. Holloway consulted papers in her folder. Dr. Marshall was a hematologist. She specialized in blood disorders, particularly genetic conditions affecting hemoglobin production. Jasmine went very still. Sickle cell. Among other things, yes. The attorney met her eyes with an expression that suggested she understood more than she was saying. She maintained this facility until 2020, when she became too ill to continue. The research was never completed. What research? Holloway handed her an envelope. Dr. Marshall left instructions that you were to receive this after viewing the property. I don't know the contents. My role is simply to facilitate the transfer. The envelope was heavy paper, sealed with wax that had cracked with age. Jasmine's name written in handwriting she didn't recognize, but somehow felt familiar anyway. Elijah called from the back of the first floor. "Mom, there's stairs going down." Jasmine found him standing before a door marked basement, laboratory access, authorized personnel only. The door was locked, but one of the keys on Holloway's ring fit perfectly. The stairwell descended into darkness. Jasmine flicked the light switch, surprised when overhead bulbs actually responded. Dim, flickering but functional. The basement stretched the entire footprint of the building. Not a storage space, but a working laboratory frozen in time. Workbenches lined the walls. Equipment Jasmine didn't recognize covered every surface. Centrifuges, microscopes, incubators, machines with digital displays that still glowed faintly despite years of disuse. But what stopped her breath entirely was the back wall. A massive steel door, the kind you'd find in a bank vault, dominated the far end of the basement. It looked newer than everything else, deliberately installed, maintained with care that the rest of the building hadn't received. Holloway's voice came from behind her. Dr. Marshall had that installed in 2015. I have no key for it. She never provided one. Elijah walked toward the vault, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. What's inside? The attorney shook her head. Unknown. Dr. Marshall's instructions specify that you're to make that discovery yourself. She believed you would understand why when the time came. Jasmine stared at the vault, at the combination lock that seemed to mock her with its circular impossibility. $8,400 for treatment her son needed. $1.7 million in property value she couldn't access. And a steel door protecting secrets from a woman she barely knew who'd somehow seen fit to leave her everything. They returned upstairs. Holloway produced documents requiring signatures. Transfer of deed, liability releases, utility transfer authorizations. Jasmine signed them all in a daze, her mind still in the basement staring at that vault. "The property is yours, Miss Carter." Holloway handed her the keys, heavy and cold in Jasmine's palm. "What you do with it is entirely your decision." Though I will note that Dr. Marshall was very specific in her final instructions. She believed this facility contained work that could change lives. She wanted someone with personal understanding to decide its fate. Jasmine looked at Elijah, leaning against her side, exhausted from walking through the building. Someone with personal understanding. A son with sickle cell disease. A great-aunt who'd researched blood disorders for 40 years. The connections were obvious. The implications were terrifying to hope for. After Holloway left, Jasmine sat on the dusty reception desk, Elijah beside her, both of them staring at the envelope in her hands. "Should we open it?" Elijah's voice was quiet, but curious, like when he found mystery books at the library. Jasmine broke the wax seal. Inside, 3 pages of handwritten text in the same deliberate script from the envelope. "My dear Jasmine, if you're reading this, you've seen the laboratory. You've seen the vault. And you're wondering why an old woman you barely knew would leave you a building full of dust and secrets. The answer is simple. You're the only one who will understand what I spent 40 years trying to accomplish. I was diagnosed with sickle cell disease at age 7. In 1962, that was essentially a death sentence. My parents were told I wouldn't live past 20. But I survived through stubbornness, luck, and eventually medical advances that bought me more time than statistics suggested I deserved. I became a hematologist because I understood suffering from the inside. I researched blood disorders because I live with one. And I purchased this building when I discovered something that medical journals wouldn't publish and pharmaceutical companies wouldn't fund. There's a treatment, not a cure. We're not there yet, but a therapy that could reduce crisis episodes by 70 to 80%. That could give children like your Elijah normal childhoods instead of hospital rooms. That could let mothers like you sleep through the night without wondering if your child's pain will escalate beyond control. I developed it. I tested it. I documented everything. And then I learned that bringing it to market would cost $18 million in FDA trials. Money I didn't have. Money companies wouldn't invest because the patient population is too small to generate adequate profit. Sickle cell primarily affects Black Americans, and pharmaceutical economics don't favor rare diseases in marginalized communities. So I made a different choice. The vault contains 38 years of research, complete treatment protocols, clinical data, everything needed to continue what I started. But more than that, it contains assets I acquired specifically to fund completion of this work. I was careful, Jasmine. I lived modestly, invested wisely, and accumulated resources over 4 decades with a single purpose: to ensure that someone with the right motivation could finish what I began. The combination to the vault is 7 numbers. Your birth date, month, day, year. I've watched you from a distance through family, seen you become the kind of woman who fights for her child against impossible odds. You're exactly who I built this for. What you find inside will test you. People will try to take it. Others will say you have no right to it. Powerful institutions will claim ownership. But remember this. I chose you deliberately. The research belongs to you. The resources belong to you. And what you do with both will determine whether children like Elijah get the future they deserve. Be brave. Be smart. And don't let anyone convince you that profit matters more than lives. With all my hope and faith, Vivian. Jasmine read the letter 3 times. Elijah leaned against her, patient in the way children with chronic illness learn to be. Mom, what's it say? Jasmine folded the pages carefully, tucked them back in the envelope. She looked at her son, 7 years old with eyes that had seen too much pain, and made a decision that would change everything. It says Grandma Vivian left us treasure, but we have to find it first. The vault combination was straightforward. Jasmine's birth date, 04/09/1987. 7 numbers she'd written on forms 1,000 times, now transformed into keys, unlocking secrets 4 decades in the making. Her hand shook as she turned the dial. Left to 4. Right past 4 twice to 9. Left again. The mechanism clicked with each number, precise engineering responding to correct sequence. The final number locked into place with a sound like certainty. Jasmine pulled the handle. The vault door swung open on hinges that moved smoothly despite years without use. Vivian had maintained this, even when the rest of the building deteriorated. Inside, the space was perhaps 8 feet deep and 6 feet wide, lined with shelves, filled with documents, equipment, and things that made Jasmine's breath catch. The first shelf held research binders, 38 years of documentation, organized by year. Laboratory notebooks with dates spanning 1982 through 2020. Every experiment recorded in Vivian's careful handwriting. Elijah peered around her. Are those science books? Sort of, baby. These are Grandma Vivian's discoveries. The second shelf contained medical equipment. Vials of compounds in climate-controlled storage. Centrifuge tubes with samples preserved in suspension. And a locked case with biohazard symbols. Contents that would require specialized handling. But the third shelf was what stopped time entirely. File boxes, 12 of them, each labeled with financial institution names. Merrill Lynch, Vanguard, Fidelity. Investment portfolios accumulated across decades. Jasmine lifted the first box with trembling hands. Inside, account statements dated through the previous month. Certificates of deposit. Stock portfolios. Bond holdings. Real estate investment trusts. She opened the second box, then the third, each one revealing assets Vivian had quietly accumulated while living in a modest apartment, driving a 15-year-old car, wearing clothes from discount stores. The fourth box contained something different. A bound ledger with Vivian's handwriting. A detailed accounting of every investment, every decision, every calculation made with single-minded purpose. The final page showed a sum that made Jasmine sit down hard on the concrete floor. Total assets held in trust for research completion and family support. $568,312,473. Elijah knelt beside her. Mom, you're crying. Jasmine pulled him close, tears streaming down her face that were part shock, part grief, part something that might have been hope if hope felt this terrifying. I'm okay, baby. I'm just... She couldn't finish the sentence. How did you explain to a 7-year-old that his great-great-aunt had spent 40 years transforming personal suffering into a fortune specifically designed to help children like him? The ledger contained a letter paper clipped to the final page. Jasmine, by now you've seen the totals. You're probably in shock. You might be wondering if this is legal or ethical or whether you have any right to it. Let me be clear. Every dollar in these accounts came from legitimate investments. Every transaction is documented. Every tax was paid. I didn't steal this. I earned it through patience, careful planning, and understanding that money, like research, compounds when given time. This isn't inheritance in the traditional sense. It's funding. Resources allocated specifically to complete research that could save lives, but won't because it's not profitable enough for pharmaceutical companies to care. The binders on the first shelf contain everything needed to bring my treatment through FDA approval. Hire the right scientists, pay for proper trials, navigate regulatory requirements. It can be done. It should be done. And you have the resources to make it happen. But I won't lie to you. The moment people learn what you have, they'll come for it. Family members claiming they deserve a share. Lawyers arguing about estate law. Companies insisting the research should be sold to them for pennies while they profit from billions. Government agencies questioning your competence to manage this. You'll need protection, legal representation, scientific advisors who care about the work more than the profit. And you'll need courage to tell everyone who says you can't do this that you're doing it anyway. The combination to the second vault is Elijah's birthday. Yes, there are 2 vaults. I told you I was careful. With all my faith in you, Vivian. Jasmine looked up from the letter. Second vault? Elijah pointed to the back corner where shadows made it difficult to see clearly. There's another door, Mommy. Smaller. She'd missed it entirely. A second vault door, perhaps 3 feet square, set low in the wall where darkness and angle of vision rendered it nearly invisible. Elijah's birthday, 03/27/2017. This vault opened easier, the mechanism newer. Inside, plastic bins stacked carefully. Jasmine pulled the first one out. Cash. Bundled hundreds in bank straps. $50,000 per bundle. 10 bundles per bin. She checked the second bin. The same. The third. All identical. 10 bins total. $5 million in untraceable currency, available immediately without involving banks, lawyers, or institutions that could freeze assets during probate. Vivian had thought of everything. But beneath the cash bins, one more item. A small leather journal, newer than the research binders. Dated through the previous year. Jasmine opened it to find a different kind of documentation. Names, addresses, phone numbers. Scientists Vivian had identified as sympathetic to community-focused research. Lawyers specializing in intellectual property and pharmaceutical regulations. Journalists who'd written about healthcare access disparities. Community organizers working on sickle cell advocacy. An entire network, mapped and ready, waiting for someone brave enough to activate it. The final entry was dated 3 weeks before Vivian's death. I don't know if Jasmine will have the courage to do this. I barely know her. We've only met twice. But I've watched from a distance through family connections. I've seen her fight for Elijah against impossible odds. I've watched her refuse to accept that her son's illness means his childhood has to be suffering. That's the only qualification that matters. Not education, not connections, not experience. Just the absolute refusal to accept that children should suffer because healing them isn't profitable enough. If you're reading this, Jasmine, you've already proven you have what matters most. Everything else, we can build. Together, with the resources I've left you, we can finish what I started. Be brave. The world tells women like us that we're not qualified to change systems. Prove them wrong. Jasmine sat in the vault surrounded by decades of research, 568 million in documented assets, and 5 million in immediate cash. Her phone buzzed. Marcus again, probably calling to tell her she needed to be realistic about Elijah's care, that she couldn't keep fighting battles she'd never win. She let it go to voicemail. Elijah tugged her sleeve. Are we rich now? Jasmine looked at her son, 7 years old with sickle cell disease, living in a world that had decided his suffering wasn't profitable enough to solve. Then she looked at the research binders, 40 years of work from a woman who transformed personal pain into systematic solutions. No, baby, we're not rich. She pulled him close. We're dangerous. The first person Jasmine called was someone she'd never met, but whose name appeared 17 times in Vivian's journal. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, molecular biologist formerly of Johns Hopkins, currently running an independent research lab in Silver Spring focused on underserved genetic conditions. The phone rang 4 times before a woman answered, voice sharp with the impatience of someone interrupted during complex work. This is Okonkwo. Dr. Okonkwo, my name is Jasmine Carter. I'm calling about Dr. Vivian Marshall's research. The silence that followed lasted exactly 5 seconds. When Okonkwo spoke again, her tone had completely transformed. Vivian died 6 weeks ago. I attended the memorial service. Are you family? Her great niece. She left me her laboratory and everything in it. Another pause, this one carrying different weight. Everything? Research binders spanning 38 years. Treatment protocols, clinical data, complete documentation for a sickle cell therapy she developed. Jasmine heard what sounded like a door closing, background noise disappearing. And the funding documentation? Yes. How much? Jasmine looked at Elijah, coloring quietly on the floor beside stacks of research binders they'd been carrying upstairs all morning. 568 million. The sound Okonkwo made wasn't quite a laugh. Wasn't quite a gasp. Jesus, she really did it. Did what? Built the infrastructure to finish her work without pharmaceutical companies stealing it. Okonkwo's voice carried admiration and something else, maybe grief for someone who'd planned so carefully but hadn't lived to see completion. Vivian talked about this for years. Most of us thought she was dreaming. We didn't realize she was engineering. Can you come see it? The research, I mean. I need someone who can tell me if it's real or if you're holding $500 million in decades of legitimate research. Okonkwo finished. I could be there tomorrow morning. Don't touch anything in the biological storage. Don't open any sealed containers. And for God's sake, don't tell anyone else what you found until we secure proper legal protection. Jasmine gave her the address, ended the call, and immediately dialed the second name on Vivian's list. Marcus Chun, attorney specializing in intellectual property and biomedical patents. His voicemail picked up immediately. This is Chun. If you're calling about new client intake, my schedule is full through next quarter. Leave detailed message. Jasmine left detailed message. Then she called the third name, the fourth, the fifth. By evening, she had appointments scheduled with 6 of Vivian's identified contacts. Scientists, lawyers, advocates who'd been waiting for someone to activate the network Vivian had carefully constructed. That night, sleeping in a laboratory's second floor, Jasmine woke to Elijah crying. Not the sharp pain cries that meant crisis, but the low, exhausted sobbing that came after pain had finally receded enough to allow tears. She gathered him against her chest, rocking slowly. It's okay, baby. We're okay. It hurts, Mommy. I know it hurts. But Grandma Vivian's medicine will make it better? His voice was small, hopeful in a way that broke her heart, because children shouldn't have to hope for basic relief from suffering. Jasmine thought about research binders, about treatment protocols developed over 40 years, about resources allocated specifically to bring healing to children like her son. Yeah, baby, Grandma Vivian's medicine is going to make it better. She just hoped she wasn't lying. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo arrived at 7:30 the next morning, a tall woman in her 50s with silver-streaked locks and eyes that assessed everything with scientific precision. She wore jeans and a Johns Hopkins sweatshirt, carrying a laptop bag and serious expression. Show me. Jasmine led her to the basement vault. Now, standing open, shelves visible. Okonkwo stopped in the doorway, hand pressed her mouth. She actually organized it by year, like she knew someone would need to follow her work chronologically. For the next 4 hours, Okonkwo read. She pulled binders randomly, checking dates, examining experimental protocols, verifying documentation standards. She opened the climate-controlled storage, examined vials with the careful respect of someone who understood exactly what she was looking at. Elijah brought her coffee at one point, prepared the way Jasmine had taught him, careful not to spill. Okonkwo accepted it with a gentle smile. You must be Elijah. He nodded, suddenly shy. Your great-great-aunt was brilliant. Did you know that? She was sick like me. Mommy told me. Okonkwo's expression softened. She was sick like you, and she spent her whole life trying to make sure other kids wouldn't have to hurt the way she did. After Elijah wandered back upstairs, Okonkwo turned to Jasmine with an expression that carried weight. This is legitimate. All of it. The research is sound, the documentation is meticulous, and the treatment protocols are ready for Phase 2 clinical trials. Jasmine's heart hammered. Phase 2. Vivian completed Phase 1 trials in 2018. Okonkwo pulled out a specific binder, opened to pages marked with careful annotations. 23 patients, all with confirmed sickle cell disease. Treatment reduced crisis episodes by an average of 74%. No serious adverse effects. Results were consistent across demographics. Then why didn't she publish? Okonkwo's jaw tightened. She tried. New England Journal of Medicine rejected it. Said the sample size was too small. JAMA rejected it. Said pharmaceutical funding was required for credibility. Lancet rejected it. Said independent researchers lacked institutional backing necessary for breakthrough claims. Translation? Okonkwo closed the binder carefully. A Black woman working independently on a treatment for a disease that primarily affects Black Americans couldn't get published because the medical establishment is built on institutional gatekeeping and pharmaceutical funding. They didn't question her science. They questioned her legitimacy. Jasmine felt rage crystallize her chest, cold and hard. So, she just stopped trying? No. Okonkwo gestured at the vault, at decades of continued research. She kept working, refined the treatment, improved efficacy, documented everything to standards that would make FDA approval undeniable. And she accumulated resources so that when the right person came along, they could bypass the entire corrupt system. What do we need to do? Phase 2 trials with expanded patient group. Minimum 100 participants. Then Phase 3 for final safety confirmation. FDA submission. Patent protection. Manufacturing partnerships. Okonkwo pulled out her phone, began typing notes. 18 months minimum if everything goes perfectly. 3 years more realistic. And cost. Okonkwo met her eyes directly. 12 to 15 million for trials. Another 5 to 8 million for legal protection, patent filing, regulatory navigation. Call it 25 million to be safe. Jasmine thought about 568 million in assets. We have it. I know. Okonkwo's smile was fierce. That's what makes this dangerous. The moment pharmaceutical companies realize an independent researcher has both the science and the funding, they'll do everything possible to either buy it or destroy it. The second visitor arrived at noon. Marcus Chen looked nothing like Jasmine expected. Mid-30s, wearing a Metallica t-shirt and sneakers, carrying a messenger bag covered in band patches. But when he spoke, his voice carried the precise authority of someone who'd won battles in federal court. Vivian sent me her research framework 3 years ago, asked me to review it for patent potential. He pulled out his laptop, began typing before he'd even fully sat down. I told her she was sitting on something worth conservatively $2 billion in market value if brought to approval. $2 billion? Conservative estimate. Chen pulled up spreadsheets. Sickle cell affects approximately 100,000 Americans. Treatment currently consists of pain management and blood transfusions. Cost per patient averages $200,000 per year in medical expenses. A therapy reducing crisis episodes by 70+%. He looked up, eyes sharp. Every patient would want it. Every insurance company would prefer it to emergency room costs. Global market expands to 300,000 patients. You're looking at treatment generating 5 to 10 billion annually. Jasmine's head spun, but Vivian wanted it affordable. I know. Chen's expression suggested he'd had this conversation with Vivian multiple times. She was very clear. Treatment should cost no more than $5,000 per year per patient. Enough to sustain research and manufacturing. Not enough to profit obscenely from suffering. Can we do that? If we structure it correctly. He pulled up documents. We establish a nonprofit research foundation. You transfer the assets into the foundation. The foundation funds trials, obtains patents, then licenses manufacturing to companies willing to meet pricing requirements. You maintain control of intellectual property. They get reasonable profit margins. Patients get affordable treatment. What's to stop them from just stealing it? Chen smiled, and it wasn't friendly. I am. I've spent 7 years litigating against pharmaceutical companies that thought they could steal research from independent scientists. I won approximately 90% of my cases. He leaned forward. Vivian hired me 3 years ago on retainer specifically for this moment. I've been preparing. That afternoon, 2 more visitors arrived together. Dr. James Wilson, retired FDA official who'd spent 30 years navigating drug approval processes, and Patricia Michaels, healthcare journalist who'd written extensively about pharmaceutical industry exploitation of rare disease communities. Wilson examined Vivian's Phase 1 trial documentation with the methodical focus of someone who knew exactly what FDA required. His assessment took 90 minutes. When he finished, he looked at Jasmine with something like respect. This meets every standard FDA would demand and several they wouldn't think to require. Dr. Marshall documented better than most pharmaceutical companies with billion-dollar budgets. So we can move forward? With proper Phase 2 structure, yes. Wilson pulled out his phone. I know 12 clinical trial coordinators who would work on this. I can have protocols designed within 2 weeks. Michaels had been quiet, taking notes, photographing documents with Jasmine's permission. Now she spoke, voice carrying the particular intensity of journalists who'd found stories that mattered. When can I publish? Jasmine blinked. Publish what? Everything. The story of how a black woman spent 40 years developing breakthrough treatment, got rejected by every major journal, and built independent infrastructure to bypass pharmaceutical companies entirely. Michael's eyes gleamed. This is the story of how medical establishment fails Black Americans, how profit matters more than lives, and how one brilliant, stubborn woman refused to accept it. But if you publish, everyone will know. Okonkwo's concern was obvious. Pharmaceutical companies, investors, people who'll try to stop this. Good. Michael's smile was sharp. Let them try in public. Jasmine looked at the assembled group. Scientists, lawyers, journalists, advocates. Vivian's network activated. How long before people come for this? Chen answered immediately. The moment you file patent applications. Probably within 48 hours. And if we don't file, then someone else will. Chen's tone was matter-of-fact. Pharmaceutical companies monitor independent research. They have scouts looking for exactly this. Breakthrough therapy, unclear ownership, vulnerable researcher who could be intimidated or bought. If we don't protect it legally, someone will steal it legally. Jasmine thought about Elijah upstairs, drawing pictures. About $568 million Vivian had accumulated specifically to prevent theft. About children suffering because healing them wasn't profitable enough. File everything. Today. Chen was already typing. I'll need your signature on 47 documents. We're establishing the Vivian Marshall Foundation for Hematological Research, transferring assets, filing provisional patents, and submitting FDA pretrial notification. He looked up. This will generate attention. Good. Jasmine's voice was steadier than she felt. Let them pay attention. The attention came faster than anyone predicted. Chun filed patent applications at 4:17 p.m. on Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, Jasmine had 17 voicemails. Pharmaceutical companies wanting to schedule meetings. Investment firms offering to buy the research. Lawyers claiming various family members deserved portions of the estate. And Marcus, her ex-husband, who hadn't called in 3 weeks, suddenly deeply concerned about Elijah's well-being and Jasmine's decision-making capacity. She listened to his voicemail while making breakfast for Elijah. Jasmine, I heard about some inheritance. We need to talk about what's best for Elijah. I'm his father. I have rights regarding medical decisions. Call me back immediately. She deleted it. The first actual visitor arrived at 9 a.m. A man in an expensive suit, carrying leather briefcase, smile that didn't reach his eyes. He knocked with the confidence of someone accustomed to doors opening. Jasmine answered, Elijah beside her. Ms. Carter, my name is Richard Brennan. I'm Senior Vice President at Helios Pharmaceuticals. I'd like to discuss a business opportunity. Not interested. Brennan's smile never wavered. I understand Dr. Marshall left you research materials. Helios specializes in bringing breakthrough therapies to market. We could offer you a very generous licensing agreement. How generous? $50 million. Upfront payment plus royalties on sales. Jasmine did math in her head. The research was conservatively worth $2 billion in market value. He was offering $50 million. 2.5%. No. Brennan's smile finally cracked. Ms. Carter, I don't think you understand the complexity of bringing treatment to FDA approval. The regulatory requirements, the trial costs, the legal protections needed. I understand perfectly. Jasmine kept her voice level. I also understand you're offering me 2% of value, while Helios would profit 98%. And I understand that Helios's track record includes pricing breakthrough drugs at levels unaffordable to the communities who need them most. Brennan's expression hardened. You can't do this alone. Watch me. She closed the door in his face. Okonkwo arrived 30 minutes later, expression tight with controlled anger. Helios called me. Offer me position as lead researcher if I convinced you to sell. What did you say? That I'd rather work in a gas station than help pharmaceutical companies steal from black women. Okonkwo dropped her bag on the table. They're going to escalate. Let them. But Okonkwo was right. The escalation came that afternoon. Marcus appeared at the laboratory door with 2 people Jasmine didn't recognize. A woman in business attire carrying manila folders. A man with the particular stance of someone accustomed to intimidating people through physical presence. Jasmine. Marcus's voice carried false warmth. We need to talk about Elijah. There's nothing to talk about. Actually, there is. The woman stepped forward. My name is Catherine Brooks. I'm an attorney representing Mr. Marcus Carter in matters regarding his son's welfare. We have concerns about the environment you're raising Elijah in. Jasmine's stomach dropped. This building hasn't been inspected for child safety. The woman gestured at the laboratory equipment visible through the door behind Jasmine. You're exposing a medically fragile child to potentially hazardous materials. We're filing for emergency custody evaluation. Marcus wouldn't meet her eyes. I'm worried about him, Jazz. You're in over your head with this inheritance thing. Elijah needs stability. Elijah needs his mother. Jasmine's voice shook with rage barely controlled. And he needs the treatment Vivian developed. That's what this is about, isn't it? You heard about the money. I heard you inherited some research you don't understand and money you can't manage. Marcus finally looked at her. I'm protecting my son. Your son? Jasmine stepped forward. Where were you during his last 3 crisis episodes? Where were you when I was sitting in emergency rooms? Where were you when insurance dropped his coverage? That's not fair. You're right. It's not fair. She felt something break open inside her chest. 3 years of suppressed fury flooding out. What's not fair is that you divorced me because dealing with Elijah's illness was too hard. What's not fair is that you disappeared until you heard I might have money. What's not fair is that you're using custody threats to get access to resources meant to help children like him. The attorney started to speak. Jasmine cut her off. Get out, all of you, and tell whatever pharmaceutical company hired you that threatening my child won't make me sell. Marcus's expression flickered. What? You think I don't know? Jasmine's voice rose. Helios offers me 2% this morning. You show up with custody threats this afternoon. The timing is very subtle. The attorney's face remained carefully neutral. Mr. Carter contacted us independently. Sure he did. Jasmine looked at her ex-husband. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave. You're going to drop whatever custody challenge you're pretending to care about. And if you ever use Elijah as leverage again, I will make sure every judge in Baltimore knows you abandoned your sick son until you thought there was money involved. Marcus looked like he wanted to argue. The attorney touched his arm, whispered something. They left. Jasmine closed the door, locked it, then slid down to sit on the floor, shaking. Elijah emerged from the back room where he'd been hidden. Is Daddy trying to take me away? Jasmine pulled him close. No, baby. No one's taking you anywhere. But she knew this was just the beginning. That evening, Chen arrived with a legal team. 4 attorneys, all specialists in different areas. Family law, intellectual property, estate litigation, pharmaceutical regulations. They're going to attack from multiple angles. Chen spread documents across the table. Custody challenges to prove you're unfit. Estate disputes claiming other family members deserve portions. Intellectual property challenges claiming Vivian's research was developed using institutional resources, therefore belongs to previous employers. FDA complaints claiming you're not qualified to oversee trials. Can they win? On custody? No. You're a devoted mother with clean record. On estate? No. Vivian's will is airtight. On intellectual property? Chen hesitated. Maybe. If they can prove any connection between Vivian's work and Johns Hopkins research conducted 40 years ago. Can they prove it? They don't have to prove it. They just have to create enough legal uncertainty that patent office delays approval while litigation proceeds. Tie you up in court for 3 years while Elijah and thousands of other kids keep suffering. Jasmine felt exhaustion pressing down like physical weight. So what do? We fight on every front. Chen's voice was firm. I filed protective orders on custody. We're documenting all pharmaceutical company contacts to establish pattern of intimidation. We're submitting patent applications with documentation so thorough no judge could find fault. And he looked at Michaels, who'd been listening quietly. We're going public before they control the narrative. Michaels pulled out her laptop. I've been writing since yesterday. Full feature on Vivian's life, her research, the systematic rejection by medical journals, the inheritance structure, and most importantly, on pharmaceutical industry's immediate attempts to either buy or steal the work. What does it publish? Tomorrow morning. Front page, digital edition. The article will include enough technical detail that independent scientists can verify legitimacy. Once it's public, stealing becomes much harder because everyone's watching. Patricia Michael's article published at 6 a.m. Thursday morning. By 7, it had been shared 12,000 times. By 8, it was trending on Twitter. By 9, CNN was calling for interviews. The headline was perfect. Dying doctor spent 40 years creating cure pharmaceutical giants ignored. Left $568 million to ensure it reaches patients. The story opened with Vivian's diagnosis at age 7. Moved through her career fighting medical establishment gatekeeping, detailed the breakthrough treatment and systematic journal rejections, then pivoted to the inheritance structure and immediate pharmaceutical company aggression. Michaels had included interviews with Okonkwo, Wilson, and 3 other scientists who verified the research's legitimacy. She documented Helios's $50 million offer and calculated it as 2% of conservative market value. And she'd identified Marcus's custody filing as occurring 7 hours after patent applications became public record. The comment sections exploded. Patient advocacy groups, scientists, parents of children with sickle cell, medical professionals angry about how their institutions had failed Vivian, lawyers offering pro bono support, community organizers wanting to help. By noon, Jasmine had 237 emails. Offers of support vastly outnumbered threats, though threats certainly existed. Okonkwo arrived with coffee and printed copies of responses from medical community. Look at this. She spread pages across the table. 17 independent scientists asking to review the research. 9 clinical trial facilities offering to host phase 2 studies. 23 doctors asking how they can enroll patients. Chin appeared next, expression somewhere between amazed and concerned. 6 law firms have offered pro bono support. 3 patient advocacy organizations want to help fund trials. But he hesitated. Helios issued a statement calling you unqualified and suggesting the research might be fraudulent. Jasmine's anger flared. Fraudulent? Standard playbook. Chin pulled up his phone, showed her Helios's press release. While we commend any effort to address sickle cell disease, concerns exist regarding research conducted outside institutional oversight. We encourage proper verification through established channels before raising false hope in vulnerable communities. Translation? Okonkwo's voice was cold. Translation: Black woman without PhD can't possibly have developed legitimate treatment. Therefore, everyone should ignore her until pharmaceutical companies can steal it properly. Chin's expression was grim. This is about to get ugly. But the response came from unexpected direction. At 2 p.m., the Association of Black Scientists issued a statement. Dr. Vivian Marshall was a respected researcher whose work was systematically dismissed by institutions that prioritized pharmaceutical funding over scientific merit. The treatment protocols she developed meet or exceed standards for FDA submission. We stand with Ms. Jasmine Carter and call on the medical community to support independent research that serves marginalized populations. By 3 p.m., Congressional Black Caucus had requested briefing. By 4, 3 major news networks wanted interviews. By 5, patient advocacy groups had organized demonstrations outside Helios Pharmaceuticals headquarters. The narrative was shifting. That evening, Jasmine agreed to one interview. Local news, conducted in a laboratory, focused on Vivian's work and Elijah's story. The reporter was gentle. "Ms. Carter, what do you want people to understand about what you're trying to do?" Jasmine looked at Elijah, sitting nearby with his coloring books. "I want people to understand that my son suffers every day because pharmaceutical companies decided treating sickle cell isn't profitable enough to prioritize. I want them to understand that a brilliant woman spent 40 years creating solution, got rejected by every institution she approached, and had to build completely independent infrastructure because the medical establishment is broken." She turned back to the camera. "And I want them to understand that we're going to bring this treatment to approval whether Helios Pharmaceuticals likes it or not. Because children like Elijah deserve to have childhoods, not just hospital rooms and pain management. The interview aired at 6. By 7, it had 2 million views. By 8, something shifted. The attacks didn't stop, but the support overwhelmed them. Donations poured into the foundation Chun had established. Scientists volunteered expertise. Clinical facilities competed to host trials. Patients asked to participate. Okonkwo sat at the laboratory table, reviewing responses, expression somewhere between tears and laughter. Do you realize what you've done? Jasmine was too exhausted to process triumph. Made pharmaceutical companies angry? You've changed the conversation. Okonkwo gestured at her laptop screen. For 40 years, the narrative was that sickle cell doesn't matter because it affects Black Americans and treating Black Americans isn't profitable. You just made that narrative public. Made it visible. Made it something people can't ignore. She nodded. More importantly, you made it personal. Not abstract statistics about healthcare disparities. A mother fighting for her son. That resonates. But Wilson's expression was cautious. Public support is crucial, but it doesn't replace proper trials. FDA doesn't approve treatments based on sympathy. I know. Jasmine looked at Vivian's research binders, 40 years of meticulous documentation. That's why we're going to do this right. Phase 2 trials with every protocol followed exactly. Documentation that makes approval undeniable. How fast can we move? Okonkwo asked. Wilson considered. With proper funding and clinical facilities already offering support, we could begin Phase 2 enrollment within 6 weeks. Trials run 12 months. Phase 3 adds another 18. Call it 30 months total if everything proceeds smoothly. 30 months. Jasmine thought about Elijah, 7 years old, 30 months of his childhood spent in pain because healing him wasn't profitable enough. Then we start tomorrow. But the attacks weren't finished. Friday morning, Marcus appeared on local news. Jasmine barely recognized him, cleaned up, wearing suit, expression carefully arranged into paternal concern. I'm worried about my son. The interviewer nodded sympathetically. Elijah has complex medical needs. His mother is well-intentioned, but she's in over her head with this inheritance. I'm seeking custody to ensure he gets proper care in a stable environment. Elijah stood beside Jasmine watching the television, his small voice quiet. Why is Daddy lying? Jasmine pulled him close. Because some people think money is more important than truth. The interviewer asked follow-up questions Marcus had clearly prepared for. Jasmine's living in an abandoned laboratory building. She has no medical training. She's making decisions about experimental treatment based on research she doesn't understand. As Elijah's father, I have to protect him. The segment ended with the interviewer's voiceover. Custody battle brewing as mother pursues controversial treatment using massive inheritance. More tonight at 11. Jasmine's phone exploded. Supportive messages vastly outnumbered critical ones, but the critical ones were vicious. Accusations of child endangerment. Suggestions she was mentally unstable. Threats to call Child Protective Services. Chen arrived within the hour. We need to respond. Now. How? The truth. He pulled out his phone. I've arranged interview with NPR. They'll do fair coverage. You tell your story. Let people see who you actually are versus who Marcus is pretending to be. The NPR interview happened that afternoon. The host was professional, thorough, and genuinely interested in facts rather than drama. Ms. Carter, can you walk us through Elijah's diagnosis and treatment history? Jasmine told it chronologically. Diagnosis at 5. Initial treatment plan. Insurance coverage problems. Marcus's departure. The steady escalation of crisis episodes. The terminated coverage. The $8,400 treatment she couldn't afford. And your ex-husband's involvement during this period? He filed for divorce when Elijah was diagnosed. Said he couldn't handle the stress. I haven't received child support in 18 months. He saw Elijah twice last year. Once for Christmas, once for Elijah's birthday. She kept her voice level, factual, until he heard about the inheritance. Now he's suddenly concerned about custody. What would you say to people who question whether you're qualified to oversee medical research? I would say Dr. Vivian Marshall was eminently qualified. She earned her medical degree from Howard University in 1982. She published in respected journals before pharmaceutical companies decided her independent work threatened their profits. She spent 40 years developing this treatment with more care and precision than most corporate-funded research. Jasmine's voice strengthened. I'm not a scientist. I'm not pretending to be. But I'm qualified to love my son, to fight for him, to recognize when someone left resources specifically designed to help children like him. And I'm qualified to hire actual scientists like Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, actual FDA experts like Dr. James Wilson, actual attorneys like Marcus Chun who will ensure everything is done correctly. The interview ended with the host asking one final question. What do you want for Elijah? What any mother wants. For him to have a childhood, to play without pain, to grow up without spending half his life in hospital rooms. She paused. Dr. Marshall's treatment can give him that, can give it to thousands of children. And no pharmaceutical company's profit margin is more important than that. The interview aired that evening. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 2 hours, 47,000 people had signed petition supporting the Vivian Marshall Foundation. Within 4 hours, 3 members of Congress had requested meetings. Within 6 hours, custody attorney representing Marcus had quietly withdrawn from the case. Marcus called Jasmine's cell at 9 p.m. She answered on speaker, Chin present as witness. Jazz, Marcus's voice was defeated. I'm dropping the custody thing. Good decision. I didn't know they were going to. He stopped. I thought. You thought you could use Elijah to pressure me into selling. Jasmine's voice was flat. You thought wrong. Silence on the line. Then, quietly, is the treatment real? Could it actually help him? Yes. Can I? Marcus hesitated. Can I be involved? Not with the money stuff. Just with Elijah's treatment when it's ready? Jasmine looked at Elijah, listening carefully. That's not my decision. That's his. Elijah took the phone. You can come to my appointments, Daddy. But you have to stay. Not just when it's easy. More silence. Then Marcus's voice, rough with emotion. Okay, buddy. I'll stay. After the call ended, Chin updated his documentation. With custody threat withdrawn and public support established, we're in stronger position. But he pulled up new documents. Helios has filed formal complaint with FDA claiming research methodology doesn't meet standards. Can they actually block approval? They can delay it. Wilson had joined them, expression grim. Force extensive additional review, require redundant testing, tie it up in bureaucratic process for years. Unless we move faster than they expect. Wilson pulled out his own laptop. I've been coordinating with clinical trial facilities. We could begin phase 2 enrollment Monday if we have sufficient participants. How many do we need? Minimum 100. Preferably 150 for statistical significance. Okonkwo looked up from her phone. The article published yesterday. I've had 417 emails from sickle cell patients asking to participate in trials. The room went silent. For 100? Okonkwo's expression was fierce. People have been waiting for this their entire lives. You think they're not paying attention? Chin was already typing. If we can begin trials Monday, file preliminary data within 3 months, we establish momentum FDA can't easily stop. Even if Helios ties us up in court, trials continue. How much will this cost? Wilson calculated quickly. Phase 2, with 150 participants across multiple sites? $8 million. Phase 3 adds another $6 million. Total $14 million to FDA submission. Jasmine thought about $568 million in assets Vivian had accumulated. Less than 3% of available funding. Do it. Begin enrollment tomorrow. The Phase 2 trials began on a Monday morning that felt like vindication and terror in equal measure. Jasmine stood in the Baltimore clinical facility watching the first participant receive treatment. A 19-year-old woman named Aaliyah, whose mother stood beside her crying quietly. Dr. Okonkwo administered the injection with steady hands, her voice calm and professional. You'll need to stay for observation for 4 hours. We'll monitor vitals, check for any adverse reactions, and schedule your follow-up for 2 weeks. Aaliyah looked at Jasmine. Thank you for doing this. For not giving up. Thank Dr. Marshall. Jasmine's throat tightened. She's the one who never gave up. By the end of the first week, 73 patients had enrolled across 6 clinical sites: Baltimore, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Detroit, Houston, Los Angeles. Every facility reported the same thing: patients eager to participate, families grateful for hope, and remarkable initial tolerance of the treatment. Elijah was patient number 47. Jasmine held his hand while Okonkwo prepared the injection, trying to keep her own fear hidden. This is going to help, baby. Make the pain happen less. Elijah was braver than she was. Will hurt. Just a pinch, like when they take blood. He squeezed her hand during the injection, then looked up with solemn eyes. I can be brave if it helps other kids, too. Jasmine pulled him close, overwhelmed by love and terror and the weight of $568 million meant to ensure this treatment reached every child who needed it. The first crisis came not from science, but from politics. Wednesday afternoon, Jasmine received a call from Chun, his voice tight with controlled anger. FDA just announced surprise inspection of all trial sites. Simultaneously, tomorrow morning. That's unusual? That's unprecedented. And it happens to coincide with Helios filing formal complaint about research methodology. Chen's frustration was obvious. They're trying to find procedural violations to shut us down before we generate data proving treatment works. Can they shut us down? If they find legitimate safety violations, yes. If they claim administrative irregularities, they can delay us months. Wilson's voice came through the phone. He was conferencing in. But they're not going to find violations because we've followed every protocol exactly. That evening, Jasmine, Okonkwo, Wilson, and Chun visited all 6 clinical trial sites, reviewing documentation, checking procedures, ensuring everything met not just FDA requirements but exceeded them. The Baltimore facility coordinator, Dr. James Morrison, was a 60-year-old black man who'd spent 40 years navigating medical bureaucracy. He met them with calm certainty. They're going to look for any excuse. Record-keeping errors, consent form irregularities, storage temperature deviations, anything. His voice was steady. But I've been preparing for this since we started. Every document is perfect. Every procedure is documented. Every participant consent is airtight. The FDA inspectors arrived Thursday at 8 a.m. 6 teams, 12 inspectors total, descending on trial sites with the intensity of people looking for problems rather than verification. The Baltimore inspection lasted 7 hours. Inspectors examined every file, every storage unit, every piece of equipment. They interviewed participants, reviewed consent forms, checked temperature logs, and scrutinized documentation with the kind of hostile precision that made clear they weren't neutral observers. Dr. Morrison remained calm throughout, providing exactly what they requested, answering questions with professional courtesy that never crossed into defensiveness. At 3 p.m., the lead inspector, a thin woman named Patricia Hendricks, delivered her preliminary findings. Storage protocols meet requirements. Consent documentation is thorough. Participant selection criteria are appropriate. Her tone suggested disappointment. We'll need to review complete records at our office, but preliminary inspection reveals no immediate safety concerns requiring suspension. So we can continue. Hendricks's expression was carefully neutral. You can continue pending final review, but understand that any irregularities discovered during complete analysis could result in retroactive suspension. After they left, Morrison sat heavily in his office chair. That was a hit job. Chen nodded. Helios has connections at FDA. They're trying to manufacture problems where none exist. Will it work? Morrison looked at Jasmine. Depends on how brave FDA officials are willing to be. If they cave to pharmaceutical pressure, they'll find something. If they care about science over politics, they'll approve continuation. The waiting was excruciating. 48 hours while FDA compiled reports from all 6 sites. 48 hours while patient enrollment continued. 97 participants now, with 53 more scheduled. Saturday morning, Wilson received the official notification. All 6 sites cleared for continuation. No safety violations identified. Trials approved to proceed. Chen read the report with obvious satisfaction. They couldn't find anything because there was nothing to find. He looked at Jasmine. You just survived your first major attack. There will be more. Let them come. But the next attack came from a direction no one anticipated. Marcus's mother, Elijah's grandmother, filed for guardianship on Monday morning. Her petition claimed that Jasmine was mentally unstable, using Elijah as test subject for unproven medical treatment and exposing him to dangerous situations. The supporting documentation was extensive. Photographs of the laboratory building, emphasizing its industrial appearance. Testimony from a hired child psychologist who'd never met Elijah, claiming the environment was unsuitable. And character witnesses, Marcus's new wife, two of his friends, all testifying that Jasmine seemed erratic and obsessed. Shin called her immediately. This is more sophisticated than Marcus's custody attempt. They've hired serious legal team. Can they win? On guardianship? No. You're fit mother with clean record. But they can drag it out, create negative publicity, make you spend time in court instead of focusing on trials. That's the point. Exactly. Helios is funding this. I bet my career on it. Can you prove it? Chun was quiet for a moment. Give me 3 days. The guardianship hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Jasmine arrived with Chun and a legal team that had grown to include 7 attorneys, all working pro bono after the NPR interview. Marcus's mother, Dorothy Carter, sat with her lawyers, expression carefully arranged into grandmotherly concern. She looked at Jasmine with what might have been real sorrow or excellent acting. The judge, Honorable Patricia Williams, was a black woman in her 60s who'd built a reputation for cutting through nonsense and focusing on facts. She reviewed the petition with obvious skepticism. Mrs. Carter, you're requesting guardianship of your grandson based on claims that his mother is unfit? Yes, Your Honor. Dorothy's voice trembled slightly. I love Jasmine, but she's making dangerous decisions, experimenting on Elijah with untested treatments, living in an industrial building, becoming obsessed with this inheritance. Judge Williams turned to Jasmine. Miss Carter, how do you respond? Chin stood. Your Honor, if I may provide context. He pulled out documents. The treatment in question is currently in FDA-approved Phase 2 clinical trials across 6 sites with 97 participants. The research was developed over 38 years by Dr. Vivian Marshall, a respected hematologist. Ms. Carter is not experimenting on her son. She's providing him access to cutting-edge treatment under proper medical supervision. He placed more documents on the bench. The building in question is a former medical laboratory that has been inspected and approved for residential use. Ms. Carter has established a nonprofit foundation, the Vivian Marshall Foundation, which is funded to the amount of $568 million and overseen by legitimate medical and legal professionals. Judge Williams examined the documents. So this isn't an unstable mother pursuing dangerous treatment. This is a mother utilizing substantial inherited resources to provide her son access to promising therapy? Correct, Your Honor. And the grandmother's concern is? Chin's expression hardened. Funded by Helios Pharmaceuticals, which has financial interest in preventing this treatment from reaching market. Objection. Dorothy's lead attorney stood quickly. That's pure speculation with no evidentiary support. Chin placed another document on the bench. Payment records showing Helios Pharmaceuticals paid $300,000 to the law firm representing Mrs. Carter, dated 1 week before this petition was filed. The courtroom went silent. Judge Williams studied the document with an expression that made Dorothy's attorneys visibly nervous. Mr. Chun, are you suggesting this guardianship petition is frivolous litigation funded by a pharmaceutical company attempting to disrupt legitimate medical trials? I'm not suggesting, Your Honor. I'm demonstrating. Judge Williams looked at Dorothy with disappointment that felt worse than anger. Mrs. Carter, do you have any genuine concern for your grandson's welfare? Or are you being paid to disrupt your daughter-in-law's work? Dorothy's composure cracked. I was told Jasmine was putting Elijah at risk. They said. Who said? Dorothy looked at her attorneys helplessly. They said the treatment was dangerous, that someone needed to protect him. Judge Williams's voice was cold. Motion for guardianship denied. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the Bar Association for investigation into potential ethics violations. She looked directly at Dorothy's lead attorney. Using family court to advance corporate interests is not just inappropriate, it's potentially criminal. The hearing ended in less than 30 minutes. Outside the courthouse, Dorothy approached Jasmine with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry. I thought. They told me you were putting him in danger." Jasmine felt exhaustion rather than anger. "Did they pay you?" Dorothy's silence was answer enough. "How much?" $50,000. Dorothy's voice was barely audible. "Marcus said it was for Elijah's future, that we'd put it in trust for him." Jasmine looked at her former mother-in-law with something like pity. "They used you, just like they tried to use Marcus, because stopping treatment is worth more to them than your grandson's health." She walked away, Chum beside her, leaving Dorothy standing on the courthouse steps with whatever guilt or realization was finally breaking through. That evening, Michaels published a follow-up article. Pharmaceutical giant funded frivolous custody challenge to disrupt sickle cell treatment trials. The story included court documents, payment records, and Judge Williams's scorching dismissal. The backlash against Helios was immediate and severe. Patient advocacy groups organized protests. Congressional representatives demanded investigations. The company's stock dropped 7% in one day. But more importantly, patient enrollment accelerated. By Wednesday, 147 participants had enrolled. By Friday, 193. People who had been watching, uncertain whether to trust the treatment, now understood exactly who was trying to stop it and why. 3 months into Phase 2 trials, the preliminary data was undeniable. Okonkwo presented findings to the research team on a Tuesday evening. Jasmine sat beside Wilson, Chun, and Morrison, watching graphs and charts that represented children's lives transformed. Crisis episode reduction, averaging 78% across all participants. Okonkwo's voice carried controlled excitement. Pain scores decreased by 64%. Hospital admissions down 81%. And 0 serious adverse events. She pulled up comparison charts. This is unprecedented for sickle cell treatment. We're not just managing symptoms, we're fundamentally improving quality of life. Elijah had been on treatment for 12 weeks. In that time, he'd had one minor crisis compared to the usual 6 or 7. He'd gained weight, started playing outside without exhausting immediately, and asked Jasmine if he could join his school soccer team. "Can we share preliminary results?" Jasmine looked at Wilson. Would that help or hurt FDA approval? It could help. Wilson considered carefully. Preliminary data showing strong safety profile and efficacy signals gives FDA confidence to approve Phase 3. But he hesitated. It also gives Helios ammunition to attack methodology before we have complete results. They're already attacking. Okonkwo's voice was firm. "Let's show everyone why." Chin agreed. Public preliminary results also create accountability. FDA will have harder time delaying approval if everyone can see the data proves treatment works. They published preliminary findings on Thursday morning, not in traditional medical journals. Those would take months to review, but through the Foundation's website, shared immediately across social media, sent to every major news outlet. The response was explosive. Within hours, medical professionals were analyzing data, patient advocates were celebrating, and mainstream media was covering it as breakthrough story. Sickle cell treatment shows 78% crisis reduction in early trials. But Helios's response was equally swift. They held a press conference Friday afternoon, their chief medical officer standing before cameras with carefully rehearsed concern. "While we appreciate any effort to address sickle cell disease, we have serious concerns about research methodology." The CMO spoke with the authority of institutional backing. 3 months is insufficient time to establish long-term safety. The participant pool lacks diversity in disease severity. And most concerning, this treatment hasn't undergone proper peer review. Translation? Okonkwo watched the press conference with cold anger. Translation: it's working, so they need to create doubt before FDA approves it. Chin's jaw was tight. They're playing their final card, questioning legitimacy of the science itself. But the medical community responded faster than Helios anticipated. Within 24 hours, 17 independent hematologists had reviewed the published data and issued statements supporting the methodology. The Association of Black Scientists released detailed analysis confirming research standards. And 3 former FDA officials publicly stated that preliminary results exceeded typical thresholds for Phase 3 approval. Dr. Marcus Chun, no relation to Jasmine's attorney, was particularly pointed in his response. I've reviewed Dr. Marshall's complete research documentation. It's more thorough than most pharmaceutical company submissions I've evaluated in 30 years at FDA. Helios's criticism isn't about science. It's about profit protection. The narrative was shifting decisively. What had started as an inherited story had become something larger. Public understanding of how pharmaceutical companies prioritize profit over patients, how medical establishment gatekept against independent researchers, and how one brilliant woman and her determined great niece were challenging the entire system. Congressional hearings were inevitable. The House Committee on Oversight and Reform scheduled testimony for 6 weeks after preliminary results published. Jasmine would testify, so would Okonkwo, Wilson, and 3 trial participants. Helios's CEO would testify. So would representatives from FDA and National Institutes of Health. Chun prepared Jasmine for 3 days straight. They'll try to make you seem unqualified, emotional, lucky, rather than competent. Stay calm, stick to facts, and remember that your expertise isn't science. It's understanding what patients need. The hearing room was packed. Media, patient advocates, pharmaceutical industry representatives, all crammed into space designed for half that many people. Elijah sat in the front row between Marcus, who'd been attending appointments as promised, and Dorothy, who'd been quietly supporting from distance since the custody disaster. Chairman Rodriguez opened the hearing with unusual directness. We're here because a Black woman spent 40 years developing breakthrough treatment that every major medical journal rejected. Because her great-niece inherited resources to continue that work independently. And because pharmaceutical companies are fighting harder to stop this treatment than to develop their own. Jasmine testified first. She told Elijah's story chronologically. Diagnosis, treatment struggles, insurance failure, the inheritance, the decision to continue Vivian's work. She kept her voice steady, focused on facts rather than emotion. Representative Miller from Texas, clearly sympathetic to pharmaceutical industry, questioned her credentials. Ms. Carter, you have no medical degree, no research experience, no institutional backing. Why should we trust your judgment about treatment affecting vulnerable patients? Jasmine met his eyes directly. I don't have those credentials, but I hired people who do. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo has published 67 peer-reviewed papers on hematological disorders. Dr. James Wilson spent 30 years at FDA. Dr. James Morrison has overseen clinical trials for 25 years. She leaned forward slightly. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to trust the science they've verified in the patients who are experiencing 78% reduction in suffering. Representative Johnson from Georgia asked the question everyone wanted answered. What do you want, Ms. Carter? What's your endgame? FDA approval for this treatment. Pricing structured so every patient can afford it. $5,000 per year maximum. And patent protection that prevents pharmaceutical companies from stealing research Dr. Marshall spent 40 years developing. Jasmine's voice strengthened. I want children like Elijah to have childhoods. That's the endgame. Okonkwo testified next, presenting data with scientific precision that made questioning her expertise impossible. Then trial participants testified, a 12-year-old girl who'd missed 70 days of school the previous year, and only 8 days since starting treatment. A 23-year-old man who'd been hospitalized monthly for 5 years and hadn't needed emergency care in 4 months. A mother whose 6-year-old daughter was playing outside for the first time in her life. Then Helios CEO Richard Brennan testified. He wore expensive suit, an expression of carefully constructed reason. We support innovation in sickle cell treatment, but we have concerns about bypassing established processes. FDA approval exists for good reason, to protect patients from unproven therapies marketed by unqualified individuals. Representative Adams from California didn't let him finish. Mr. Brennan, Helios offered Ms. Carter $50 million for research your own analysis valued at $2 billion. That's 2.5%. Why should we believe your concern is patient safety rather than profit protection? We offered fair market value for improving research. Adams pulled out documents. Your company's internal emails, obtained through discovery in unrelated litigation, show executives discussing how to acquire Marshall research before independent trials demonstrate efficacy and increase acquisition cost. That's not concern for patient safety. That's concern for profit margins. Brennan's composure slipped. Those emails are taken out of context. Really? Adams read directly from the document. If Carter succeeds with independent trials, we lose leverage for cheap acquisition. Recommend aggressive legal strategy to delay FDA approval until financial pressure forces sale. What context makes that acceptable? The hearing lasted 6 hours. By the end, the narrative was clear. Pharmaceutical company tried to suppress breakthrough treatment to protect profit model versus mother, and researchers fighting to bring affordable healing to marginalized community. FDA issued statement 3 days later. Based on preliminary phase 2 data and absence of safety concerns, we are approving acceleration to phase 3 trials with abbreviated timeline. Full review will proceed with priority designation. It wasn't complete victory. Phase 3 would still take months, but it was enough. FDA had officially recognized the treatment's promise and rejected pharmaceutical industry's attempts at suppression. That evening, back at the laboratory, the core team gathered for the first time in weeks. Exhaustion showed on every face, but so did cautious hope. 12 months. Wilson calculated carefully. Phase 3 enrollment, monitoring, data compilation, FDA submission. 12 months to approval if everything proceeds optimally. Funding? Chen asked. $6 million for Phase 3. Another $2 million for legal protections during approval process. Jasmine looked at the numbers. We have more than enough. But Okonkwo's expression was troubled. Approval is just the beginning. Manufacturing, distribution, insurance negotiations. That's where pharmaceutical companies have real power. They can't stop FDA approval now, but they can make implementation impossible. How? By controlling manufacturing capacity. Most production facilities are owned by pharmaceutical companies. They can refuse to manufacture competing treatments. Okonkwo pulled up documents. Vivian anticipated this. She left notes about acquiring independent manufacturing, but that requires additional infrastructure we haven't built yet. Chen was already researching. There are independent biomanufacturing facilities. Small operations, mostly focused on rare disease treatments that Big Pharma ignores. His fingers moved across his laptop. 3 facilities in the U.S. might have capacity. Cost would be significant. Another $20 to $30 million for manufacturing setup. Do it. Jasmine's decision was immediate. We're not stopping because Helios controls production. There's one more issue. Wilson's tone suggested this was the complicated part. Insurance coverage. FDA approval doesn't guarantee insurers will pay for treatment. If they deny coverage, patients can't access it regardless of approval. So we make it accessible regardless of insurance. All eyes turn to Jasmine. Foundation funds cover costs for any patient whose insurance denies coverage. $5,000 per patient per year. If we treat 10,000 patients annually, that's $50 million. We can sustain that indefinitely with $568 million in assets. Chen smiled slowly. You're building parallel healthcare system. Outside pharmaceutical control, outside insurance limitations. Vivian built it. Jasmine corrected. I'm just activating what she spent 40 years creating. The 12 months passed in blur of activity. Phase 3 enrollment reached 300 participants. Data continued showing remarkable efficacy. Crisis episodes reduced by average of 81%, hospitalizations down 87%, quality of life improvements that made parents weep with relief. Manufacturing partnerships were established with 2 independent facilities. Distribution networks were built through community health centers rather than traditional pharmaceutical channels. Insurance negotiations proceeded. Some companies agreed to coverage, others refused, and the foundation covered every refused patient. Elijah turned 8. He joined the soccer team. He went to summer camp for the first time. He slept through the night without waking in pain. The transformation wasn't just medical, it was existential. He moved through the world like child rather than patient. Marcus attended every appointment, slowly rebuilding relationship with his son. He apologized to Jasmine once, awkwardly, and she accepted because holding anger required energy she needed elsewhere. Dorothy volunteered at the foundation, working reception, trying to atone for the custody disaster. Jasmine let her, not because she'd forgiven completely, but because the work was more important than grudges. 18 months after opening Vivian's vault, FDA issued final approval. The treatment, officially designated VMS, one in honor of Vivian Marshall's initials, was cleared for market with indication for sickle cell disease. The approval came on a Tuesday morning. Chun called Jasmine immediately, his voice breaking with emotion he usually controlled. "We won. Full approval, no restrictions, priority designation maintained." Jasmine stood in the laboratory, surrounded by research binders that had started everything, and let herself cry for the first time in months. The press conference was held at the Baltimore facility where first patient had enrolled. Aaliyah was there, healthy and smiling, her mother beside her. Elijah stood next to Jasmine, wearing a shirt that said Grandma Vivian's legacy that the foundation had made. Reporters packed the room. This wasn't just local news anymore. This was national story about how healthcare system could be changed by people willing to fight. Jasmine spoke without notes. 18 months ago, I couldn't afford $8,000 for my son's treatment. Insurance had dropped his coverage. Pharmaceutical companies had decided that healing children like Elijah wasn't profitable enough to prioritize. She gestured at Okonkwo, Wilson, Morrison, Chun, all the people who'd made this possible. Dr. Vivian Marshall spent 40 years being told she was wrong, that her research didn't matter, that independent scientists couldn't challenge pharmaceutical industry. She was told to give up, to accept that some problems were too big to solve. Jasmine's voice strengthened. She refused. She built infrastructure, accumulated resources, documented everything, and left it all to someone she barely knew because she believed that personal understanding mattered more than credentials. That mothers fighting for their children were exactly the people who should control healthcare decisions. She looked directly at the cameras. Today, VMS, one is approved. Today, every child with sickle cell disease in America has access to treatment that will reduce their suffering by 80%. Today, the treatment costs $5,000 per year instead of $200,000. And today, pharmaceutical companies learned that they don't control who gets to be healthy. The applause was deafening. Questions followed. How will you ensure access? What about global distribution? What's next for the foundation? Jasmine answered each one, but the final question came from young reporter in the back. "Ms. Carter, what would you say to Dr. Marshall if she were here?" Jasmine looked at Elijah, healthy and strong beside her. Then at the reporters, the patients, the scientists, everyone who'd fought to make this possible. "I'd say she was right. That one person refusing to accept injustice can change everything. That patience and precision and 40 years of careful work can overcome institutional failure. And that leaving resources to someone with personal understanding was the smartest decision she could have made." She paused, emotion finally breaking through carefully maintained composure. "And I'd say thank you for seeing something in me I didn't see in myself, for trusting me with work that mattered more than anything I'll ever do again, for proving that healthcare belongs to patients, not profit margins." 6 months after FDA approval, the foundation had treated 12,000 patients. Crisis episode reductions remained consistent around 80%. Quality of life improvements were documented across demographics. And the cost per patient stayed at $5,000 per year, affordable through insurance or foundation support. Helios Pharmaceuticals filed for bankruptcy 9 months after approval, unable to compete with affordable treatment they tried to suppress. 3 executives faced federal charges for the custody scheme. Richard Brennan resigned in disgrace. Other pharmaceutical companies learned the lesson. 2 reached out to the foundation requesting collaboration on rare disease treatments. The terms were non-negotiable: affordable pricing, transparent research, community control. Several agreed. Jasmine stepped back from daily operations, transitioning leadership to Okonkwo and a board of directors that included patients, scientists, and community advocates. The foundation didn't need her managing details. It needed sustainable leadership that would outlast any single person. She bought a house. Real house with yard where Elijah could play. She went back to school, public health degree, learning systematically what she'd learned through necessity. And she started writing Vivian's biography, telling the story of a woman who'd been dismissed as crazy for being 40 years ahead of her time. 2 years after opening the vault, Jasmine received a letter from Geneva. World Health Organization wanted to discuss global distribution of VMS, one to African countries where sickle cell disease was even more prevalent than in America. She took Elijah with her. They stood in WHO headquarters, surrounded by diplomats and health ministers, and Jasmine presented the same terms she'd given American pharmaceutical companies: affordable pricing, local manufacturing partnerships, community control. The agreements took 6 months to negotiate, but eventually 23 African nations signed distribution contracts. The treatment that had started in Baltimore laboratory would reach millions. On what would have been Vivian's 83rd birthday, the foundation held a memorial ceremony. They unveiled a statue outside the laboratory. Vivian at her microscope, surrounded by research notes, expression of determination that had defined 40 years of work. The plaque read, Dr. Vivian Marshall, 1942 to 2023. She heard children suffering and refused to accept that profit mattered more than healing. She built the infrastructure to prove that healthcare belongs to communities, not corporations. She transformed personal pain into systematic solutions. She was right about everything. Elijah, 9 years old and healthy, stood beside his mother reading the inscription aloud. Was she really right about everything? Jasmine looked at her son, at the laboratory that had become research center, at the people gathered to honor woman who died before seeing her work completed. Yeah, baby. She was right about everything. That evening, after ceremonies ended and crowds dispersed, Jasmine sat alone in the vault where everything had started. The research binders were gone now, digitized, distributed, transformed into treatment that had changed 12,000 lives and would change millions more. But she kept one thing: Vivian's final letter, the one that had been paperclipped to the ledger showing $568 million in assets. She read it again, words she'd memorized but needed to see physically. Be brave, be smart, and don't let anyone convince you that profit matters more than lives. Jasmine folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and looked around the empty vault. Not empty, really, just transformed. The research had moved out into the world. The money had been spent on the purpose Vivian intended. The infrastructure had become permanent. One woman refusing to accept injustice had built foundation for systematic change. And another woman, desperate and drowning, had found courage to finish what her great-aunt started. Elijah appeared in the vault doorway, soccer ball under his arm. Mom, are you coming? Dad's here to take me to practice. Yeah, baby, I'm coming. She stood, turned off the light, and locked the vault behind her. Not because secrets needed protecting anymore, but because some spaces should be preserved as reminders of where transformation began. Outside, Marcus waited by his car, relationship with his son rebuilt through consistency rather than promises. Dorothy had returned to her own life, chastened and quiet. The pharmaceutical companies had moved on to other targets, but the foundation remained. The treatment continued, and somewhere in Baltimore, a 7-year-old girl was receiving her first dose of VMS. One, about to discover that childhood could mean more than hospital rooms. Vivian Marshall had spent 40 years being told she was crazy for believing one person could change a broken system. Jasmine Carter had spent 18 months proving she was right. Some treasures were measured in dollars. Others were measured in lives transformed, suffering prevented, futures made possible. The vault had held $568 million in assets. But its real treasure was simpler and infinitely more valuable. Proof that refusing to accept injustice could build infrastructure that outlasted any single life, that healed thousands, that transformed systematic failure into systematic solutions. Elijah kicked his soccer ball across the parking lot, moving with energy he'd never had before treatment. Healthy, strong, one child among 12,000 who would become millions. That was the inheritance Vivian had really left. Not money, though money mattered. Not research, though research was crucial. She'd left proof that mothers fighting for their children were exactly who should control healthcare decisions. That communities deserved treatments developed for healing rather than profit. That one brilliant, stubborn woman refusing to quit could build the foundation for revolution. And that sometimes the greatest treasures were hidden in places everyone else had dismissed as worthless. In abandoned laboratories, in rejected research, in the voices of people told they didn't matter. Jasmine had been cast out with her sick son, desperate and drowning. She bought an $800 laboratory for reasons she couldn't fully explain. And she found $568 million, 40 years of research, and a blueprint for transforming how healthcare worked for the most vulnerable. The mountain had remembered. Vivian had remembered. And now, finally, everyone else would remember too. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.